Hi, my name is Mari or Dev Ramsawakh. I use they, them pronouns. I am a brown person with short, reddish pink hair, red glasses, wearing red lipstick, um, with two nose piercings. And my background has a rainbow flag behind me and some stickers of some ghosty things. I go by Dev. I am a disabled, gender fluid, uh, Indo-Caribbean, neurodivergent, and queer person. Um, and all of those identities are really important to me, and all kind of impact each other. And that's sort of what I'm here to talk about today. Um, and that is how all of these identities can work together to affect how disabled youth are, or disabled people in general, are impacted by our different identities, especially when it comes to accessing um, sexual health resources, and especially what it means to not be able to access those things. I'm going to be drawing on a lot of my own personal experiences, as well as just things I've noticed from people within my own personal community. So as I mentioned, none of my identities can be separated from each other. My queerness can't be separated from my disability, which can't be separated from my race, which can't be separated from my neurodivergence, or any of those things. Um, for example, uh, being a racialized and disabled queer has really affected my ability to really engage with the queer community, whether it's because of accessibility reasons, whether it's because of racism that I've experienced within the community. There is no way to separate my identities and be like, oh, only this one thing impacts me in this way and none of my other identities do. Um, and so in my experience, what that has meant for me is that I haven't always been able to access uh, sexual education, um, especially with regards to things like gender, or really anything that really reflects my own experiences and what would actually be important for me to know. Um, for example, in high school, I wasn't actually able to access the more comprehensive sex ed because it's actually connected to the phys ed program in my curriculum, or that's how it was when I was in school. And what that meant was, because I wasn't physically able to do the physical education, I wasn't able to take phys ed as a class in school. Um, and because of that, I wasn't able to access the sexual health courses or any of the other health courses that were connected to the phys ed program. My guidance counselor really didn't have any solutions for me, and really just said, that's something you should look into outside of school. Uh, Even if I had gotten sex ed, because of my different identities, I don't think the sex ed I would have gotten in school would have been as valuable to me anyways. I experienced things like incontinence. I also don't identify as male or female. And I have other different physical needs. And so queerness, gender identity, and all of that weren't ever addressed in my sexual health education. And so I never really, it took me a long time to really feel comfortable in my skin, in my body, and to know what it was like to feel comfortable in my body around other people. I didn't feel as though I could be a sexual person because of my disability, or I couldn't really identify with my disability if I wanted to be considered a sexual person, especially a queer person who isn't necessarily able to access party spaces or the club scene, which is a huge part of the mainstream queer culture. Um, the reason that all of this is really important to talk about and really important to address is because all of these identities also make me very vulnerable to a lot of different issues that aren't discussed enough, and especially with regards to the disabled community, as well as the other communities that I'm a part of. For example, I am actually a domestic violence survivor, and I have gone through a lot of sexual harm as well. And when we're talking about identities, it's important to talk about how, like, these very vulnerable situations. So there isn't a lot of information out there on the complex intersections that I live in. There's no stats that I can draw to that will say brown, disabled, neurodivergent, queer, and trans individuals experience this much violence. But what we do know is that disabled women are 50 to 100% more likely to experience intimate partner violence, according to Dawn Canada, and then compared to women without disabilities. And we also know that trans individuals have, like, roughly, I think the statistic that I found from VAWnet is that around half of trans individuals have experienced some type of sexual assault or intimate partner violence in their lifetime. And for those trans individuals, those numbers are higher if you're also a trans person of color. When you're taking all of that into account, these identities can put you in a very vulnerable position. For example, disabled women often aren't able to report their sexual assaults because the disability is so desexualized. It's always assumed that disabled women are not having sex, regardless of whether or not that's consensual or not. But we know that because of the barriers that disabled women face and disabled people of all genders face, that they are at more risk because of things like not having financial independence, not being able to leave their partner's insurance, or not having the ability to maintain their home without help from another partner. And those, and when you put into account the self-esteem issues that a lot of trans people face, they may not know that there are individuals who will treat them with love and care, and that can be taken advantage of as well. And when you combine all of these things together, they can really, really make people vulnerable to violence. So it's really important that we take into account all of the different identities that people have in order to address the issues that they have that are extraordinarily important and necessary to talk about. And I think that is about all I have to say on that. Thank you all for listening, and I hope that you took something from this experience and were able to learn something from me.